season starts here, the Vancouver Boat Show.
Welcome to the Vancouver International Boat Show virtual seminar series, sponsored by Freedom Marine International Yacht Sales, the premier choice for exploring the passion of yachting. Thank you for joining us. The seminar will begin in 1 moment. If you are having technical difficulties, you can reach me, the online moderator, via the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Questions for the speaker can be added to the Q&A box also at the bottom of your screen. We will answer these at the end of the presentation. Now, it is our pleasure to present Diesel Engine Essentials with Amanda Swan Neal. Welcome, Amanda. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and welcome to Diesel Engine Essentials. I am not a mechanic. Well, a guru in the mechanic.
Neither am I.
Nor is John. So I felt there was a need for more color at the boat show, and I've sat through a couple of seminars and I found them pretty grim. So I am Amanda, and I grew up sailing the South Pacific on a boat I helped my parents build, and we sailed from New Zealand to Victoria in 1980. So going back a few years, I then found my own boat to sail on, or not my own boat, but raced around the world in what is now the Ocean Race on Maiden, and met John when he sailed into New Zealand when I was working as a rigger, and I was very impressed with the boat he was sailing on.
Impressed with the engine room, anyway.
I was very impressed with the engine room. I'm also going to say, well, I won't go into that. It's a long story. We are doing 4 seminars at the Vancouver Boat Show, and this is the last one, but you can then watch the seminars for, I think it's 6 months once they post them next week. So enjoy your viewing. Well, I'm really excited to announce that the boat we're sailing on this year is going to be a Garcia Exploration 45. We're conducting 10 expeditions. These are offshore sail training expeditions from Bellingham out the Straits of Juan de Fuca and back to Bellingham. So they're 9-day expeditions. Great boat. Normally we sail our Garcia 46, but she's on lockdown in New Zealand, and we're actually putting her up for sale. So the details are on our website, mahina.com. Or since 1996, when we first got her, so many years of offshore sailing. In April, we're doing a virtual seminar, and it's over 3 days, 2 evenings and all day Saturday, and we'll have details posted soon on our website, mahina.com, or you can email us at the end of the seminar and we will send you more details. But it's taken from our book, which is 260 pages, and we'll go through each of the 20 topics to get you ready for offshore sailing. Normally, I'm known as the Essential Galley Companion, and I have just retired from 48 North from writing columns.
After how many years?
After 16. Yes, 16 years.
So every month for 16
I've been known as the Galley Companion. So doing engine room talks is a little bit of a switch, but if you can follow a recipe, you can follow the seminar and get your engine sorted. Well, John's going to leave, and it's up to me now, going solo. But I realized that most of the engine work that we do in our engine room takes 2 of us. Here we are working on it. Well, here are expedition members working on an engine part, 2 people, and they're in the galley. So there's no way I can cook dinner once the engine's in pieces, and we're trying to access the galley bench as a workbench. There is a handout for this seminar. You can download the handout from mahina.com/forms, and it goes through exactly what I'm talking through, the 6 components of an engine, some homework for you, and resources. So I've just heard a note that my internet connection is unstable. I hope you guys aren't experiencing any difficulty, but I will carry on here. If we do, the webinar host can come up and give a shout out. Right, well, the objectives of this seminar are the 6 engine systems. Startup and operating procedures, so what you need to know when you start up and run the engine. Maintenance you can do, because I'm a Kiwi, I really like to save money, I really like to get hands-on things that I can do, so we'll go through that. And then when you need to hire a mechanic, things you can't do or you shouldn't be doing, and when you need to bite the bullet, get someone down who knows more than you do and what they should be doing or helping out with you on your engine. Taking care of the environment, and then evaluating an older engine, because I realize that most of us won't be having a brand new engine. And if you have an older engine, what it takes to get it up and running so that you can head offshore.
Please stand by. We seem to be having some technical difficulties.
We are.
Amanda has joined us again. Welcome back.
Thank you. All right, so I can see me. I'm just going to share my screen again. And how are we doing, host? Can you hear me
Yep,
and
we can
see
see
me
you.
and see my slide?
Yep, it seems up and running.
All right, thank you. So we're back to two books that I recommend. And the first book on the left is written by Nigel Calder, and he is the guru for engine systems. Great diagrams, pen and ink diagrams throughout this book, and a lot of information. If you're more into colored pictures, just getting a feel for engines, then the book on the right by Fernhurst, Diesels Afloat by Pat Manley, is a great starter book to get you up and running and an understanding of engines. So I've recommended both these books, and you'll be seeing videos, or not videos, you'll be seeing slide presentations from these. All right, here we go. And in addition to the books, you also need resource manuals that are specific to your engine, a parts manual, an operator's manual, and a service manual if you're heading further afield. These can be downloaded as PDFs, but if you're on a boat, you may want to have them in hand so you can flick through them rather than relying on internet service or pulling out the DVD player. So I like to make sure that they're printed off along with your engine, because there's some specific parts or adaptations that are done to your engine. So making sure you know exactly what model your engine is. And I mentioned you can download those books from a PDF. Starting out, you need to know how many hours your engine's been running. So an engine hour meter. And I see my internet connection is definitely unstable. I'm going to shut down and make sure that I am connected through a good internet source here. The phone is on. So I'm just checking that the phone is on. I'm going to escape for a minute. I am checking my internet. No, I'm not on a stable connection. So it's jumped over. I'm going to mute myself for a minute. So the phone is on, right? All right. Great. I can stay connected.
Sure.
So can you see me, host?
Yep, we can see you. So maybe
Right.
when you share your screen, you might want to turn off your own video just to take a
Oh,
little.
I'm not sharing screen. Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
No
Okay.
problem. But that will take a little bit of stress off your internet, maybe.
Zoom. So where can I find share screen?
So it should be the green box at the bottom of your Zoom window.
I do not have that. I just have you in the corner. Ah, got it. Share screen. All right. And how do I get rid of Zoom?
So yeah, you want to pop back to that slideshow?
How are we looking now?
Well, we're not. Yeah, then there we go. Now it seems to have caught up.
Yes,
Perfect.
cool.
So yeah, you
I'm
might.
terribly sorry,
No
but here we
problem.
are back again. So I'm just going to move my box again. Right. So we are talking about our engine room, and we want to make sure that we have an engine hour meter. So the engine hour meter is going to record every time the engine's on and how many hours it's been running. From our engine hour meter, we can then set up an engine hour log. So we have how many miles the boat's done. We'll then record how many hours the engine's been running, the date, the location that we're at, and then any service that we're doing to the engine. So any maintenance, or parts replacements, or fuel top up, and that gets recorded in the engine log. This is really kind of a key piece of information to have if you're selling your boat. It sort of adds a little bit more value that you've taken such time and dedication for taking care of your engine. You want to protect your interior. We have nice carpet, and I don't want to get diesel and oil spilled all over it, so we'll lay down some towels before we get into the engine room. As I mentioned, our galley bench is used as a work surface. So we lay down a clear vinyl sheet, and then we can put the tools on top, and then often newspaper as well on top of that clear vinyl. So we're protecting the countertop. Want to protect your eyes and ears. So we have earmuffs when we're in the engine room when it's running, and some safety glasses. And then, I should protect my hands. So I need to be wearing gloves. We have 3 sets of gloves, some light gloves, medium gloves, and then heavy gloves that we use when we're in the engine room. Now, some mechanics don't have very good tools in far off countries, so a dedicated toolbox with all the parts that match your engine, so you can get your mechanic to help put that together, and it tends to grow. So over the years you get more and more parts, but a nice toolbox to keep it in. We can then pull that out when we're working on the engine, and everything's there that we need. So I've got our engine hour meter on the right. We've got our tools ready. The next thing is to keep your engine clean and dry, and preferably rust free. So I'll get into the engine room and I'll just wipe the surfaces down using simple green and paper towels. Just make sure that I can detect where the drips are and that the engine is clean. It helps to do that. Hence a white engine. I wish ours was white, because then you could really see where those drips are coming from. Better, if you're ordering an engine, will paint their red engines white for you. So here's a shout out to Better Marine. Volvo don't, just comes in Volvo green. So what does an engine do? An engine converts fuel into energy in the form of torque and electricity. Now, the electrical part we'll come to later, and the torque we'll also talk about a little bit. So it really helps to know the engine parts. There's 20 sort of off bat that are on our engine test. So if you can figure out where they are on the diagram, label them, and work out what things do, that really helps. If you're very new to engines, you can actually get a labeler or some tape and just point out where all those parts are till you become really familiar. So when you do a quick engine room check, you can see where everything is. Now we're going to get into the 6 engine systems. The fuel system, I relate to food since I'm a cook. The electrical system, I look at it as the brains of the engine. The cooling system, well, that's pretty easy since most of the time we're in the tropics. That's the hydration. I relate to it as the hydration and the sweating of the engine. The lubrication, I consider the bloodstream. The air is the engine breathing, and the transmission is that movement and torque, which I talked about earlier. So there's 6 systems. Get those down pat, and you understand your engine. How simple is that? Well, the fuel system, that's the food. And engines primarily need really clean fuel. They're just like us humans. Here we are fueling up. We're doing a long passage from Acapulco out down to Panama via Cocos Island. And we are using jugs on deck. And we're filling up in a really, really big marina because we know the fuel is super clean. All the super yachts fill here. We've got like half our slot to come in, fill up our jugs. We don't need to pre-filter it because we know the fuel is good. Fuel goes into your tank, and you hope that your tank has a lid or an inspection port that you can unbolt and see what your tank is like. So if you're buying a new boat or you haven't been near your boat for a while, you really want to know what your tank condition is like. So here we're looking inside a tank, and unfortunately the gasket that seals the lid has fallen down. So ignore the red square here. but we can see gunk and black in the bottom of this tank, and that's not good. It's going to get sucked into your fuel system and clog up your fuel. So the slime will accumulate in your tank, and you don't want it there. You can hire a company called a fuel polishing company. They come down to your boat with vans. They'll pump the fuel out of your tanks and what they call polish it, which means they'll put it through high filters, and you can put it back in your tank. And you can also then pay them once the fuel's out to clean your tank. So that's another service that they'll do. They'll put rags and swabs into the bottom of the tank, mop out that junk that's in the bottom, and then put your filtered fuel back in. That was a company in Seattle. This is a company in the Med. So once again, a van, fuel star will come down and polish your tank. Your fuel tank, and this is a diagram from the Pat Henley's book. Actually, it's from Nigel's book. So here's your tank. And as I mentioned, this stuff settles to the bottom of your tank, and that's where all the contaminants are going to be resting. When you fuel, it pays to wait about 15, 20 minutes and then take a sample piece of fuel out of your tank to make sure that the bottom of the tank isn't contaminated. We have the sump, which is at the bottom of the tank where that contaminants sit. And we actually have a hand pump that we can pump out the contaminated, or do a sample of fuel that's from the bottom of the tank and pump that out to have a look, a sump pump. So we'll then suck out some of the fuel, put it into a glass jar, check it, make sure it's clean and not contaminated, and then pour that back into the tank. But we're checking the tank. If there's stuff in the bottom of the tank and you go sailing, it's going to be sucked up into your primary filter. So your primary filter is the one you can see sitting here in the middle of this slide. But we're coming back to our sump pump. That's our little brass pump that is permanently mounted in the engine room. The pickup is the bottom of the tank, and we can take a couple of pumps on that handle for a sample of fuel. Nigel's book goes into how to install a sump pump. Before water even goes into your tank, since John's a pilot, he learned from flying that you need to put it through a funnel filter. So this will take out the water. Portable funnel filter, you can get it from West Marine. It's called Mr. Funnel, or you can order it online. And it has two filters in it. You can see the bucket on the right, we've separated out water that was in the fuel. And the two filter stems you can then wash it out to keep it clean. What you want to avoid is water in the fuel. And the water in the fuel is then going to be a source for bacteria, fungi, and yeast to grow. And that's what's going to create the black slime in your tanks. So it's not that the fuel is dirty as such, it's just that it has water in it, and then the water attracts the contaminants. You can get a fuel additive. I suggest that you do get a fuel additive. We use BioBore and add that to the tank according to the directions every time we fill up, and that's going to kill what's in the water if there's water in the fuel. Practical Sailor is a Consumers Report magazine for boaters, and they recommend that you switch the brands now and then. So if you just use one brand, it's just going to kill everything on that for that brand. But if you switch brands now and then, it can also snag some other of those contaminants. We're looking at our fuel tank and its relationship to the fuel system coming through the engine. The fuel tank's on the left. Fuel, and I'm going to back up a little bit. Color it in. I tend to think of the fuel system as being yellow. So yellow fuel comes out of the tank through a valve. It comes through your primary filter into your lift pump, secondary filter, goes through the injectors, and then all that fuel does not get consumed in your tank. Some of that fuel returns back to your tank. So you're only using a small percentage of fuel that gets pumped through your engine. And that's just to keep your pistons from firing, Mentioning color here, because I did a coloring in book for engine systems. So this really helped me understand how engines work. So if you're interested in coloring in your engine parts, you can order that from our website, mahina.com. It's $10 plus postage. It's done by a wonderful artist, Andrea England, who lives aboard her boat. She's in Victoria Harbour. So if you see a bright yellow boat called Prism, you can give a shout out to Andrea and visit her website, andreaengland.net, for amazing life on the water artwork. So she's turned into a full-time artist now. All right, so here we are with Fueler, who's our fuel person. And we've colored in our fuel dragon, and just to give you a sample of what the book is like. And proceeds from the book go to the Maiden Foundation and schools and education books in the countries that we sell to. Right, long story, back to our tank. As I mentioned, fuel comes out through the primary filter, pumped into through the secondary filter, injectors, and back to the tank. Got it. This is a breakdown from Yanmar system of that same process. So if you get your parts manual, you can then work out all those separate parts, the filter being in the center of the screen there. We're now going to talk about our primary filter, and its job is to separate the water out of the fuel. It has a glass sight bulb in the bottom, so when you glance into the engine room, you can see if that filter or that sight bulb does have water in it. You see it as discoloration and looks kind of funky. The cartridge gets replaced, so that's the filter cartridge. And when you replace the filter cartridge, you can top it up totally with fuel, clean fuel, and that'll save you from bleeding the engine. The secondary filter is on the engine itself. It's a canister, and you'll be unscrewing that and replacing the filter cartridge in accordance to your engine directions. So a 4-cycle engine, what does it actually do? The piston comes down and air comes into the piston chamber. The piston spins around, that air gets compressed, which means it's now warm and compressed. The third point is that the fuel comes down into that warm compressed chamber, and it ignites the explosion or the power stroke, which pushes the piston rod down. It spins around again, the valve opens, and that spent gas and exhaust gas vents out through the exhaust. So we have intake, compression, injection, power, and exhaust. That's 5 to me, but they call it a 4-cycle engine. And these are all happening at 2,000 revs per minute. So it's working incredibly fast. Here's a bit diagram of that just in motion, that the chambers are all opening and close, or the valves are opening and closing, and that the pistons are moving up and down. Fuel injectors are on the top of your engine, and they need to be serviced when you're not getting really clean motoring, and when it's hard to start. John just filled me in there. So generally it's a certain amount of 1,000 hours according to your manual. Your injector is supposed to spray in a set pattern, like pretty similar to perfume. And if the nozzles are clogged or they're not working right, the spray pattern is going to be uneven, and that's not going to cause your pistons to fire off evenly either. As I mentioned, servicing the injector nozzles, these get sent away, so it's a little tricky to do yourself, generally at 1,000 hours. And when you put them back in, make sure that you use anti-corrosive such as Never-Seez. That's the gray compound on the injectors, so they don't get locked into the head of your engine. The electrical part of the engine is the brains. Not a lot you really need to know about. There's the starter motor, so that what kicks the engine over when it starts. But the main thing that I'm always concerned about is the alternator. Is the engine working? Is the alternator working? And are we charging the batteries? The hardest thing about an alternator is getting enough belt tension so that you're driving the alternator and that the belts aren't slipping, because that's going to burn out your alternator. So we have custom bracket on our engine, screw type, that we can then incrementally adjust the tension of the belts and make sure that that alternator isn't going to slip and not be burnt out. There's 2 types of belts on your engine. There's the serpentine belt, which has lots of little ridges, and then the traditional V belt, which is quite big, sort of more rubber teeth. And so the newer engines are using serpentine belts, and they run over a few more pulleys. But if you can get an upgrade for your engine, it's probably better. If you have V belts, you want 1/2 inch deflection. So we're doing belt tension, no more. So make sure you can't press them down more than 1/2 inch. For a serpentine belt, you want to be only able to do a 90-degree twist on that belt. So you grab the belt and try and twist it, and you shouldn't be able to move it more than 90 degrees. And it's quite a tight twist. Well, here's not a very good scenario. We have our belt going over our freshwater circulation pump to a high output alternator. So they've upgraded the alternator on this engine to a high output alternator, but it means that if they're going to run this engine for a long period of time, they're going to burn out their freshwater circulation pump. Not good. You can't get enough belt tension to keep the alternator happy without burning out the circ pump. A better option if you have space on the front of the engine is to add a double pulley and keep the original high alternator, but add the high output alternator on that separate double pulley. So the red circle there is the addition to the engine, running double belts out to the high output alternator, keeping the original low output alternator on the engine with the freshwater circ pump. Whenever you're dealing with high output alternators, you want to have a voltage regulator. So that's going to be controlling the power that's going to your batteries. So when your engine starts up, it's not sucking all the power out or creating all the power first. It can then ramp up and know when to feed the batteries. We carry a spare alternator. It's kind of important to us that if the alternator goes out, we can just unbolt the dead one and bolt in a brand new one. We had to do that this year when we were on our expedition boat, which was Misty. And we chartered out of Bellingham. Alternator went down in the Straits of Juan de Fuca. Boom, we had a new alternator to put in, but the bolt pattern didn't match. So it was still sitting in its box. So I assure you that if you have a spare alternator, make sure that you've fitted it to the engine before. So you've sort of had a test run with it before you just leave it, before you have to really do it for real. We're on to the third system for the engine, and that's our cooling system. And we're starting the cooling system. There's actually two systems. We'll start with the raw water. The raw water cooling system comes from the ocean. So you'll see it starts on the right of the diagram, coming through a seacock, comes through a strainer basket. It is pumped through the engine, through the heat exchanger, and then then out the exhaust. The exhaust elbow is where that cooling water meets the exhaust water, and it's often prone to slight corrosion. And it's an area we'll come back to and talk about in a few minutes. You want to make sure that your raw water intake is clear, free of barnacles. We have a strainer put over ours so that we're not going to be sucking in jellyfish or plastic bags. The raw water strainer is a basket inside a capsule. It can be plastic or it can be metal, and water coming from the hull through the strainer basket before it enters the engine. Here's a plastic raw water strainer. About every 6 months, we'll take that basket out, scrub it down with Jif, make sure it's clean. If it's too clogged, then water's not passing through very easily. The raw water pump is prone to drips and leaks. It gets a lot of use, and that helps if it's situated on the engine where you can easily access it. Here it is on the Yanmar in the front of the engine. You're taking off the front plate of that housing and inspecting the impeller inside about every 300 hours, and then replacing it annually. When you take that faceplate off, what you're looking for are cracks in the vanes of the impeller. So the impeller gets bent as it comes around, or as it actually moves inside the device, and the little vanes can crack. So there's 1 crack, 2 crack, 3 crack, 4 cracks. This is not good. So it's not so much that the vanes are actually cracked, as that if those blades break off, they get pushed further into the engine. So here we have an impeller with no vanes on it at all. And where do those vanes go? Oh dear. They end up in the heat exchangers. Some of them do, and that can clog the heat exchanger. So every 10 years, your heat exchanger needs to be serviced. And just a cutaway of a heat exchanger here. And it may also end up in your oil cooler. So that also needs to be serviced every 10 years. And you can see those vanes have ended up covering up the face plate for the cooling. Some tricks for inserting a new impeller is to put a zip tie around those vanes to squish them so that you can then insert the impeller. And they've also added some Vaseline. So you can see here across the top, we've got some Vaseline, and that has helped to aid it in there. We carry a spare raw water pump because sometimes it's not that easy to undo the faceplate, put a new impeller in, and then if it's still dripping, it's easier to have a spare. In addition to the raw water cooling that's coming in through your engine is the fresh water cooling, and this is continually circulating around in your engine. It has the coolant, so it's going from your heat exchanger through the engine block, and it's just taking heat out of the engine. Before you start your engine, you are checking your water coolant, and every time you look in the engine room, so there's a tank for your water coolant, generally green. And then every 2 to 3 years, you want to totally replace your anti-corrosive or your coolant take it out and flush the system, and then put in new anti-corrosive, because it does contain some chemicals. We talked a little bit about the raw water pump. Now we have our freshwater circulation pump that's spinning it around, sending that water around the engine, and you're checking for drips. So you're just looking underneath it, making sure it's not dripping down on your engine. The fourth system for your engine is the lubricating system. I consider it like the blood. So before you start up, you are checking the dipstick, you're checking the oil color and the level of the oil. So if it's white and milky, you know that you've got a problem. If it's really, really grubby and dirty, it's time for an oil change. But dipstick will determine the state of your oil. When do you do an oil change? It depends on your model engine. So between 100 to 500 hours. So our new engine goes twice the life of our old engine for the engine oil. We have a Reverso 12-volt oil change pump. So that's mounted on the bottom of the engine. You can see the red circle there. And you flick a switch and it pumps the oil out of the engine, then pour in your new oil. And it kind of pays to stick to a really good quality oil. We tend to use the same brand. We'll buy it a year's supply, and knowing that we're not switching out brands to some brands we can't find in little small countries. For the oil filter that's on your engine, we have a wrench to take that cartridge off, dropping it into a plastic bag. See that green circle there? And put newspaper underneath it, so when it does come off, the drips don't go down into the bilge. Here we have a Westerbeek engine, and where do we find the oil cartridge? There it is on the side. So side-mounted cartridges are a little tricky to undo. You want to avoid drips using it into a Ziploc bag. We'll then tip out the oil from that container and recycle it. And you can see there dropping it into the bag with the newspaper underneath. This is nice on the Cummings. They are not side-mounted, but they're a lot bigger. They are vertically mounted. With the oil, we do an annual analysis test. So we'll take a sample of oil, put it into a small container and send it off to Shell, and they will then run it through tests to see if there's any contaminants in the oil or what contaminants are in the oil. And we've got a record of those over the years. So it's like doing a blood test, except it's an oil analysis. And this will tell you if there's wear patterns on your engine. This mainly is in metals and contaminants. The fifth part of the engine is air, and diesels need lots of clean air. They generally have a filter. This is fairly simple on the engine. Make sure the filter doesn't rattle and fall off, and that it's actually clean. The transmission is the sixth part of the engine, similar to that of a car. It takes energy from the engine to make the boat move forward. Sophisticated engines have a hydraulic transmission. You're checking for drips, automatic transmission fluid, which is pink or red in color. But if salt water gets into it, it's going to look like a strawberry daiquiri. So make sure you're not getting strawberry daiquiri leaks underneath your engine. If you have a prop that needs greasing, you want to know if you can do that underwater or if the boat has to be hauled out for servicing. We could actually adjust the pitch of our previous propeller. So making sure that you're not overdriving the boat is something to consider, or the size of propeller for your engine. To avoid growth on the propeller, we use Prop Speed. Love this product. So it really saves us diving down to scrub stuff off the propeller. Nigel reckons that you can lose boat speed, or everyone reckons if you've got stuff on your propeller, you can certainly lose up to half a knot with just growth. So keeping that propeller clean and shining, and Prop Speed really helps. Stuff in the water. If you get a line on your propeller, means you have to get under the water, cut that line away. And a mini scuba spare air can help with that. You can be underwater. If you've done your scuba course, you can be in the water for 3 to 4 minutes to get a line free or to work on your prop. So this just fits in your mouth and go down. Well, in Svalbard, we thought our prop had fallen off. Yes, it wasn't a good thing. We're just stuck in ice, so you can't motor through brash ice. But if you do have put your boat in reverse and the prop falls off, that's because it's broken the pin. Not a good thing to happen. All right, so we've gone through our 6 engine systems, and we're going to cover some startup and operating procedures before startup, once you're going, and then what to look for when you're underway. So before starting up your engine, you're checking your oil dipstick. We talked about that. Our coolant level. If you have transmission dipstick, you're also checking that. Belt tension, so either twisting your belts or depressing, looking under the engine, and then sighting the water separator in your array core fuel filter. Once your engine's going, you're monitoring your gauges, checking you've still got water coming out your exhaust, listening for strange noises, and then checking a look around in your engine room. Got to get your head in there. And while we're underway, we are still monitoring our instruments. We're doing an hourly engine room check, and then an Italian tune-up. Oh my goodness, what is an Italian tune-up? Well, if you're coming back to the marina and you've just been out for the day, or if you've been motoring, say, in the doldrums for a day and a half, you want to try, well, you do. You want to get rid of all that stuff that's built up in your engine. So you're bringing your throttle up to 90% for 5 to 7, 10 minutes, and you're just blowing all that soot out your exhaust. Plus, you're also heating up your oil a little bit and burning off if there's any water in your oil, that's burning off as well. So it's a bit like doing a sprint at the end of a run. You're just cleaning out all that gunk that's through your engine. Well, I'm not going to go into troubleshooting. Nigel does an amazing job. He has this chart in his book where you can go across the top and down the bottom and match the dots as to what's happening. But we'll discuss a few problems that may occur. Engine maintenance requires that if your engine has zincs, so these are sacrificial zincs that erode just with your engine running. Rather than your engine parts wearing away, the zinc is going to erode. They are little pencils, and you undo the nut at the top and pull out the rod. You can see on the right that they should be replaced if they have eroded to 50%. So some engines don't have them. But if your engine does have zincs, you need to know about that. We talked about the engine exhaust a few moments ago when we were talking about the cooling of the engine. So you can see where the seawater comes through, or the lake water, and mixes with the hot fumes of the exhaust. And this gets a buildup just of crud and stuff and soot, and it can actually get smaller and smaller, that hole, until you cannot get your exhaust fumes or your exhaust out, doesn't happen out the elbow, and the elbow's all like basically corroded to pieces. Here's a cutaway on the right of what happens. It just ends up this big mess. ExhaustElbow.com own a company that replace exhaust elbows for a fraction of the price that, say, your Yanmar dealer would do. So that's a really good company and something to look out for your engines. If your engine is below the water, you will have a siphon break, a vented loop in your engine. It has a small valve. You want to make sure that that is not clogged with seawater. Sail drives also require maintenance. They have zincs that need to be replaced, once again at 50%. Seals that need replacing every 5 to 7 years on the shaft and around the boat seal. So you need to be aware of maintenance for that. And here we have a sail drive that just opened it up and all this gunk pulled out. So something's leaked somewhere and boat needs to be hauled for service to do that. Hiring your mechanic for your annual check. First off, they're going to do the valve adjustment. With a feeler gauge, they're going to see that the valves are seated right, so you're getting good compression in your piston chamber. They're also going to make sure the engine is aligned. So the engine sits on feet, and the rubber feet get compressed after a period of time. You'll get binding at the shaft, where the shaft meets the engine, at the coupling. So you'll be undoing the coupling, putting in feeler gauges, making sure that distance is correct. And here we are doing that, measuring the gap and then bolting it back together. You may be adjusting the feet of the engine, so the mounts may need to be cranked up or down or replaced. I tend to keep our mechanic happy, so I'll send him a calendar. Once, if I can get back to Tahiti, I send him a calendar obviously once a year. Winterizing your engines, and not so much necessarily here in the Pacific Northwest, but if your boat's on the East Coast, or if you're leaving your boat for a period of time, you're flushing through anti-coolant so that your engine isn't going to corrode or erode inside. Taking care of the environment, avoiding spills and drips of diesel, recycling your batteries, recycling your oil waste. And for us, the easiest way to see if we've got drips under the engine is to put oil-absorbed sheets. And this is going to capture anything that does drip from the engine. Plus, it lets us see where the drips are coming from. A bilge cleaner of some kind if you do get stuff in your bilge. And then the bilge sock helps. This is the sock on the right. You can then sit that in your bilge and it's going to attract your contaminants. Well, if you have an older engine, you're asking yourself a series of questions. How quickly does it start up? And how much oil does it use? How much black smoke's coming out the engine, or blue smoke, or white smoke? So each of these colors is going to determine if something's wrong with your engine. Maybe it's time to replace your engine. What's that going to cost me? Well, it's generally going to cost the price of the engine, and again, if you have a professional installation done. So often you'll be changing where the engine sits, how it sits in the engine room, the feet that it sits on, and the shaft alignment. So all of that needs to be taken into consideration. If you're looking for a new engine, I will give a big shout out to Better Marine. They can customize the engine to what side you want the dipstick, what side you want the generator. They can paint a different color. Nigel Calder speaks really highly of Better Marine, and these guys are in the Pacific Northwest. They're great, and throughout Canada and the US. Now you want to be aware that you don't have a common high pressure common rail engine. These are the new engines that are going into boats. They're very sensitive to fuel running through the engine. They run under high pressure and they're computer controlled. So they're not something that you can maintain or work on yourself. So all the stuff I've just talked about is pretty void if you have a high pressure common rail engine. So don't go playing with that yourself. But if you have a 20-year-old engine and you're heading offshore or heading up to Alaska, we've got an 8-point checklist for you to do. First off is compression, your injectors, the alternator, heat exchanger, the engine mounts, the exhaust elbow, shaft and alignment, and then the damper drive. So 8 points that you should consider. The damper drive, well, this is what I found out on our engine. We had this series of clunks for a year. We tried to ignore it. Didn't get too good. We then needed to replace it in a very foreign port, which meant hiring a mechanic, which meant putting up in a hotel. Wasn't going to happen. So I quickly figured out with John that we could do it ourselves at anchor. Took a while. Oh yeah, I love engines. What? What am I tidy? Oh, yes. Well, our engine room's big enough that we can hang our tighty-whities in the engine room, plus a drying line. And when we're in Alaska, all our hats and gloves and things like that get hung in the engine room so they're nice and toasty for the next day. Space is kind of nice. Engine room toys. Really like black diamond headlamps. We've talked about that in some of our seminars. We have a flexible hose clamp driver so you can get around to kinky corners in the engine room. Telescoping magnet, so if you drop things down into the bilge, our bilge is quite deep, you can then pick them up. Also have a pick stick, so that gets bigger parts that drop underneath the engine room. If you drop a paper towel, or if one of the oil absorb pads slips down, we can then pick it up with the pick stick. Actually, I had a little duck, long story. He was keeping warm in the engine room, but he jumped off and fell underneath. Well, if you didn't really understand what I'm talking about on engines, you can buy this little model 4-cylinder engine and put it together. Or if you've got kids and want to work with it with them, so it's from Smithsonian and it's about $35 plus shipping. It's way cool. It does run on batteries though, but it is fun to put the engine together. I give a shout out to Diesel's Afloat book and some of the diagrams, and then Nigel. If you can catch one of Nigel's seminars, he's an absolute guru on engines. Good book as well. And then your resource manuals that are specific to your engine, your operator's shop and parts manual. The handout is on our website, mahina.com, the spares that we carry on our boat, Mahina Tiare. And then there's a test. If you want to put yourself to the test, this is the test that we give our expedition members. mahina.com/forms. Well, here we are, sailing my hometown, Auckland Harbour, and lights are on, which shouldn't be, but we're doing a little photo shoot here. We know that everything's working well. We'll be soon dropping the sails and motoring into the engine. Motoring into the marina. Well, we offer quite a few things. Sail training in the Pacific Northwest. We've set our schedule for Scotland for next year and Alaska, coming down from Alaska on the Garcia. We're booked out for this year, but we do have some spaces may come up. John does boat buying consultation, and we're offering our virtual seminar in April. And then we have quite a few books, including my coloring in book and my re-edition of the Galley Essentials. Well, thank you. It's a lot of info, but John and I are happy to answer any questions from you folks or any comments or
We're going to let Braden.
Okay, we'll ask. Thank you, Braden.
No problem. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, John, for joining us as well. If anyone has any questions at home, be sure to throw them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And starting us off, John at home asks, have you ever used CLR for a short flush through the raw water system?
CLR sounds like it might be an acid solution to get the salt out of the engine. Actually, no, but we do flush the engine with fresh water every time we haul the boat out. So we just have a 5-gallon pail, put the hose from the boatyard into the pail, disconnect the raw water intake hose and put it into the pail as well, turn the hose on and start the engine and run the engine for 15 minutes. And then just before we shut it down, we pour in, as Amanda mentioned, coolant or antifreeze so that the engine isn't sitting with salt water or fresh water, it's sitting with antifreeze in it, so there's no corrosion happening. I hope that answered your question, John. Who else? Okay, here.
Right.
Did you find your hands get damage work on the engine? Yeah, absolutely. So that's why.
Working with your gloves. We mentioned the gloves in the beginning, and yes, when we're in the engine room, you do get all these little nicks and scratches, and your skin as you get older, I don't know, gets thinner and thinner. So now I never used to wear gloves. Now I definitely do.
We went to Harbor Freight and bought a box of 50 gloves when COVID started happening, and they're just perfect because they're thin enough to give you some dexterity, but thick enough that they don't get torn easily.
Is running the engine at anchor to charge the batteries hard on the engine?
Well, Randy, I've got a great scenario for you. We ran our engine at anchor. We don't have solar panels. We don't have wind generator. We sold our last engine. It had 14,500 hours on it. It worked perfectly. In fact, it worked better than most cruising boats that have 2,000 or 3,000 hours on the engine. So the answer is no, it's not harder than the engine if you put sufficient load on it. So we have 2 high output alternators on our engine. So we put quite a few horsepower draw on the front end of the engine when we're running it in neutral. Are there rope cutters for Volvo sail drives? I believe there are. I don't know who makes them. What's the best RPM to charge up lithium batteries? Well, that all depends on the size of the pulley on the front of the alternator and the size of the pulley on the front of the engine, because that's how you get the RPM. Have you tried synthetic engine oil in your new Volvo, and can you replace standard oil with a synthetic? No, we have not. And synthetic oil is impossible to find in most third world countries. And so we just stick with, well, a lot of mechanics that we talk to say it's best if you can use the same kind of engine oil most of the time because of the detergents in it. So we try and stick with either Shell, which is available worldwide, or Chevron Delo 400, which is available in a lot of places. How often do you change the transmission fluid? Follow the directions in your manual. There's the answer. Where can we access your slides?
Well, the show's up for 6 months, so you can just
through VancouverBoatShow.com.
Yeah.
Any tips on inspection of a turbo engine without taking the turbo apart to see if it is good? Yeah, absolutely. So take off the air filter and then pinch the end of the turbo and just see if there's play up and down and in and out. If there is, then that means the bearings are worn. They can be replaced. Our last engine was turbocharged, and in 14,500 hours and 20 years, we did nothing to the turbocharger. It worked perfectly. Turbos used to be an issue, and people say they didn't want to get a turbocharged engine because they weren't as reliable, but boy, that's a long time ago. How many horsepower do 2 high output alternators take off the engine? That is a Nigel Calder question. I don't know, but actually Nigel teaches with us, and at one point we were figuring out something, and I think we're taking off somewhere between 7 and 10 horsepower. So it's a fair bit. Would you personally choose to change your sail drive seal every 5 to 7 years or monitor its condition a little bit longer? And if so, do you do it yourself or to avoid the expense? We have never had a sail drive, thank the Lord. And I would follow the manufacturer's suggestion on that, because if you have a problem with the sail drive seal, the boat can sink. So it's kind of a big deal. Other than the complete raw water pump mentioned in the talk, what other engine spares do you recommend keeping on board for the usual season around the Pacific Northwest? You know, Pacific Northwest, there's such good access to spare parts. I think that really the whole spare raw water pump, actually, we've got a list of spares on our website.
Mahina spares, yeah.
Yeah, we have a list of the spares we carry on board, mahina.com/forums. Belts, of course. The raw water pump,
filters,
yeah, filters, maybe a diaphragm lift pump. That's the pump that sucks the fuel out of the tank and gets it to the high pressure pump. That's not a real expensive deal, and if it goes out, you're not going to run the engine. Valerie says, I have a concern related to purchasing a pre-owned boat and wonder what is the long-term effect of running an engine at too high of an RPM? Well, Valerie, it's not good, but it's also not good and more of commonly a problem on sailboats of running the engine too long at low RPM. And so Amanda mentioned the exhaust water injection elbow, especially on sailboats, especially on Yanmars, of being a real problematic area. So the problem happens when you don't run the engine hard enough, and it just gets blocked with salt deposits, corrosion, and of course carbon. And so one thing that you can do, Valerie, is to look in your engine owner's manual and see what the maximum RPM is. You should be able to get within 200 RPM of that with wide open throttle. So put the throttle all the way down for a couple minutes and see if you can get within a 200 RPM of the rated top RPM. If you can't, then you are over-propped, meaning there's too much pitch in your propeller blades, and that's not good for the engine at all. Now, if you're getting above the maximum rated RPM, you're under-propped, the blades are too flat, there's not enough pitch in them, and that will wear the engine out. So either one will wear the engine out, too high RPMs or too low RPMs. What do you think of having a pressure gauge on the Raycor filter? Well, that's a very, very good idea. So you replace the T-handle that goes on top of the primary fuel filter with a gauge. It costs under $100. You can buy them from on Amazon. My boat has been on the hard since September 2019. I hope to launch again this summer. So do we all. What do I need to do to this engine and fuel system before launch? Well,
what did we get the yard to do? We've just done it.
What did we just do?
Yeah.
You know, the longer the boat is on the hard, the more important it becomes to run all the systems on the boat. And our guys in Auckland, New Zealand just said, do you want us to run all the pumps and start up the engine since your boat's been on the hard since, in our case, December 2019? And we said, yeah, that's a great idea. We should have told you that already. So hopefully, Roy, you put a fuel stabilizer like Stabil in the diesel fuel when you put the boat on the hard. Hopefully you also put a bactericide like BioBor in the fuel, and then you top the fuel tank up. Whenever you leave the boat in storage and you're not using it, fuel tank all the way right to the top, water tank empty. That's just the best possible procedures. So before you start the engine, this summer, if you have a inspection port on the top of your fuel tank, unbolt that and then have a look in the tank. You'll have to get some some powerful light there to be able to see to the bottom of the tank, likely. But that's a really good idea to see if there's crud in the bottom of the tank. Now, Amanda mentioned that our Hallberg Grassy and only one other builder in the world build fuel sumps into the bottom of the fuel tank. Every light aircraft in the world has a fuel sump in the bottom of the tank. And before you start the engine, you take a little probe, you push it up into the wing, and you fill up this little clear plastic probe with whatever's in the bottom of the fuel sump. That's a really great idea. So on our boat, on all Hallberg Grasslys, when they build them, the bottom of the stainless steel, not aluminum, bottom of the stainless steel tank, they welded in a little, looks like a cup.
I showed it in
oh,
the
you
diagram.
did? Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
You can go back and review it.
yeah. I'll go.
But
Okay. Go back
taking
and
a
do that.
sample fuel from the bottom of the tank, even if you just put a hose down there on a little hand pump and make sure that the
suck out
crud,
whatever's,
because that's all going to get shaken up once you go sailing.
yeah. And the chances are that there's moisture in the bottom of the tank if it's been sitting since September 2019. Any more questions?
All right, that looks like all we have for now, but we do still have a few minutes if people want to drop any questions down in the Q&A box. Is there anything else you guys want to add to the presentation before we wrap up here today?
What shows are coming up that we'd recommend?
Nothing. Just how do you get such good life out of your engines?
How do you get good life out of the engine? Not running it too lightly. So running it with a fair load. So Nigel Calder recommends slightly over-propping an engine for two reasons. The engine warms up better, and the other reason is it's more fuel efficient. And so you don't want to over-prop it more than 200 RPMs is what he says. That will help the engine last longer.
So just use your engine.
Use your engine a little bit more aggressively. So a lot of sailboaters are, this isn't an issue with powerboaters usually, but with sailboaters, they're really timid. You know, they're motoring along at 5 knots at 50% of the max rated RPM. That's really, really hard on the engine. How long to warm up an engine at the dock before I put it into gear? And how long, if so, how long after the start? Yeah, so we always tell people 2 minutes. Warm it up for 2 minutes and then cool it down for 2 minutes. It's just as important that you cool the engine down. So this is the same on aircraft. You never go from running the engine hard. So say you're powering along at 6 knots and then the wind comes up. You don't shut the engine off. You put the engine into slow forward or into neutral for 2 minutes and you just watch the temperature gauge and make sure it comes down. That's really critical. It will prolong the life of the engine. You know, if you take good care of a modern diesel engine, it will easily go, don't laugh, it will easily go 15 to 20,000 hours. When we were in Sweden, we hung out with Swedish fishermen and they all talked about their engines. Their engines were obviously all Volvo, but many of them said 20,000 hours is just standard before you do anything other than changing the oil and the water pumps. What compromises your hourly engine check when underway? David, that's a brilliant question. Do you want to take that?
Well, it's on the handout.
Oh, it's in the handout.
Yeah,
okay.
What you're looking at.
So
eyes,
looking,
smell,
listening, smelling, looking underneath the engine for any leaks. And remember, Amanda talked about the white oil absorb pad underneath the engine. So those are all important things. Well, we would like to invite you to join us for our first ever virtual offshore cruising seminar coming up mid-April.
I won't be doing the diesel. Oh no, I am a little bit.
But we're doing this
at a guru.
Yeah, we're doing this at a very exciting marine technical college in Anacortes, just south of Bellingham, and there's going to be excellent hands-on electrical and diesel and cooling. Well, he's in the lab.
He's in the lab.
It's going to be very exciting.
Yeah.
We're just starting to film it now, and this is a whole new deal for us. And you get the 250 or 260 page offshore cruising companion with the course, and yeah, it should be really good value because you can use it for a long time. Well, Braden, thank you for hosting us.
Perfect.
Vancouver Boat Show. Thank you
Yes,
very
thanks,
much for
Vancouver.
inviting us. We love.
Yay.
Hopefully next year we'll be back at the
I
Vancouver
know.
Boat Show.
Look for our crown and our aloha outfits.
Our crazy outfits.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
hopefully next year. Perfect. Well, thank you, John, for joining us. Thank you, Amanda, for your presentation today. And I want to thank everyone at home for joining us as well.
Oh yeah, the season starts here. The Vancouver Boat Show.